The day Meredith Halston stood in front of the house I had just bought and told me, "People like you rent," she smiled while she said it, the way a woman smiles when she believes she is explaining a law of nature to a slow student. She did not know my name was already on the deed. She did not know her own mansion was 6 blocks away and quietly sliding toward a fast sale to keep the bank off her doorstep. I did not argue with her. I saved every violation letter, every insult, every date and time. Then I called my broker. 6 weeks later, the attorney for the Homeowners Association opened a county file and went pale. If you want to see how long Meredith managed to look down on me, stay with me all the way to the end of this because the turn is worth it. My name is Leon Barrett. I am 48 years old. I spent 11 years doing commercial appraisals for other people before I got tired of handing my best work to men who golfed with the clients, and I opened my own shop. I drive a pickup that turned over 180,000 miles 2 winters ago and still starts on the first turn of the key every single morning. I wear jeans. I own 3 suits, and I hate all of them equally. I closed on 214 Briar Crest Drive on a Tuesday in early March, Hawthorne Ridge outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Brick and cedar, wide lawns, mature oaks, mailboxes that all match because a committee voted on it in 1998. I hired movers for the furniture, but the boxes that matter, I move myself. Files, client binders. My father's tools, which are older than I am and better made than anything I could buy today. So on that Friday morning, I was backed into my own driveway in a truck with a dent in the tailgate, wearing work boots and a gray shirt with a torn pocket, hauling a plastic tote of manila folders up my own front steps. I heard the SUV before I saw it, one of those big white ones that costs more than a starter home in some counties, tires crunching slow across the top of the drive, and it stopped at an angle that blocked the end of my driveway completely. The window came down. A woman looked at me over the top of a pair of sunglasses she did not bother to take off. 50-something, blonde, expensive, the kind of put together that takes 90 minutes in a professional. She did not say good morning. She did not say welcome. She looked at the truck, then at my boots, then at the tote in my arms. "Which house are you delivering to?" I set the tote down on the step. I took my time because I have learned that the only thing I actually control in a moment like that is my own speed. "I'm not delivering," I said. "This is my house." She laughed, not a big laugh. A small one, out the nose, the sound you make when a child tells you he is going to be an astronaut and a firefighter and a shark. "You're the new tenant then," she said, "or you work for the owner. Which is it?" "I'm the owner." She looked at the truck again. That was the tell, and I want to be precise about it because people always want to know how you can be sure. She did not look at my face when she decided. She looked at the truck and the boots and the torn pocket, and she looked at me, at all 6 feet 2 inches of a black man in his 40s standing on a porch in Hawthorne Ridge, and she assembled a story out of those pieces, and then she went looking for a way to make me fit it. "People like you rent," she said. "Owners here usually introduce themselves before they move in." There it was. She never said a word about my skin. She did not have to. It was all in the weight she put on the word you, the way she leaned into it like a woman stepping on a bug. "I'll need a copy of your lease submitted to the association within 48 hours, she said. "We track occupancy. It's a community standard." "What's your name?" "Meredith Halston." She said it the way you say a title. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I know every owner in Hawthorne Ridge." I looked back over my shoulder at the house behind me. My house, 4,100 square feet of brick, 3 days of my ownership, the smell of somebody else's carpet still in it. Then I looked back at her. "Then it sounds like your records need updating." The next morning there was an envelope taped to my door, not mailed, taped so I would see it when I opened the door with a cup of coffee in my hand. "Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association, notice of violation. Number 1 in the description read, failure to register tenant occupancy." Not the truck, not the boxes, my existence in that house filed as a violation. I did what I would tell any client to do. I did not call her. I logged into the association portal that afternoon, and inside of 4 minutes I understood at least part of what had happened. The owner of record on file for 214 Briarcrest Drive was still the Pettigrew family, the couple who had sold me the house and moved to Savannah to be near grandchildren. The association had not updated the roster after closing. That is normal. That happens in half the communities I have ever bought into. It is a clerical lag, and the fix takes 1 email. So I sent 1 email, and I sent it clean because I have spent 20 years learning that a clean file is the only argument that never gets tired. A scanned copy of the recorded deed with the county stamp on it, the final settlement statement from closing, driver's license, the name, phone number, and file number of the title company, date, time, subject line, everything in writing. I copied the property management company and the General Association inbox, not just her. Verified, a deed recorded at the County Register of Deeds with a book and page number anybody with a laptop can pull up in 40 seconds. Needed to be verified by a woman whose entire qualification was that she had been elected 3 times by people who did not want to attend meetings. That was her answer in 2 sentences 90 minutes later, and until verification was complete, the occupancy requirement remained in effect. 2 days later, I got 3 more notices. The first said my work truck had been parked in the driveway in view of the street beyond the permitted duration for commercial vehicles. The second said moving containers were visible from the roadway. The third said the tenant information form remained outstanding and that daily fines would begin accruing at $50 per day. That is when I started the folder. Everybody who has ever been on the wrong side of somebody with a small amount of power learns the same lesson, and most of us learn it too late. Your feelings are not evidence, your memory is not evidence. Documents are evidence, dates are evidence, patterns are evidence. So I scanned every notice the day it arrived, kept every email in an unbroken thread, and photographed the street with timestamps, showing every trailer, container, boat, and contractor van on it that was not mine. Travis Monroe was the first neighbor who spoke to me like a neighbor. 46, worked in medical devices, lived 2 houses down, walked a beagle that hated everything on earth, including Travis. He caught me photographing the Rileys' trailer one evening and asked mildly whether I was building a case. "I'm building a record," I said. "There's a difference." He laughed, and then he stopped laughing. He told me Meredith had a habit. He said she decided who belonged in Hawthorne Ridge before she knew anything about them, and that once she decided, she went looking for reasons. He said a family from Ohio had gotten the same treatment 2 years back over a basketball hoop, and they had sold and left inside of a year, and Meredith had told people at the pool that they had never really fit in. "She's not going to like you," Travis said. "She doesn't have to like me," I said. "She has to apply the rules the same way to me as she does to you." I met her again on a Thursday. I had a contractor out, a man named Ruiz, walking the exterior with me to price replacing a section of cedar trim and rehanging 2 shutters that the previous owners had let go soft. Meredith came up the sidewalk with her phone in her hand, and she stopped about 15 feet away, and she raised her voice so Ruiz would be sure to hear it. "The association does not allow tenants to alter an owner's property." Ruiz looked at me. I looked at her. "That's convenient," I said. "It means I don't have to ask the owner for permission." "You still want to claim you bought this house?" "I don't want to claim anything. I sent you proof. It's in your inbox and it's at the county and it's been there for 11 days. That was the moment her face changed, and I remember it clearly, because the contempt did not deepen. It curdled. Contempt is comfortable. Contempt is a chair you sit in. What she felt standing on that sidewalk was something less comfortable, which was the discovery that I was not going to raise my voice, was not going to get emotional, was not going to hand her the version of me she had already written down. She had come to have a fight with a man who did not exist, and the man who was actually standing there kept answering in complete sentences with dates attached. She left. Ruiz waited until her car was gone and said quietly that he had worked in this neighborhood for 9 years and he knew exactly who she was. That Saturday, the association agenda went out to the whole community by email. Special session Tuesday evening clubhouse to verify residency status at 214 Briarcrest Drive, and my name was on it, printed in the 3rd line under a heading in bold capital letters. Tenant violation. I wore a plain button-down shirt and jeans and my regular boots, and I carried 1 folder, and I got there 8 minutes early. Maybe 30 folding chairs, half of them full. Meredith sat at the head of a long table with Elaine Foster on her right, the association treasurer 59, reading glasses on a chain, a woman who looked like she had been taking careful notes for other people her entire working life. 3 more board members down the side, a laptop propped at the end with Daniel Kessler on the screen, the association's attorney 51, joining by video from an office with a bad ceiling light. Meredith opened the item and introduced me to the room. "This is Leon Barrett," she said. "He's the individual currently residing at 214 Briarcrest." Residing, individual, not 1 syllable of the word owner anywhere in that sentence, and she knew it, and I knew it, and I would bet a fair amount of money that Elaine Foster knew it too. "Owner of 214 Briarcrest," I said. "The association has not been able to confirm that." I stood up, walked 6 steps, and laid a certified copy of the recorded deed on the table in front of her, and a second copy in front of Elaine, and a third I emailed to Kessler while I was standing there so that the timestamp would exist. Then I sat back down. Kessler adjusted his glasses on the screen and read for maybe 40 seconds. He said that on its face the instrument appeared to be a properly recorded warranty deed, that it bore a county book and page reference, and that he would confirm against the Register of Deeds, but that he had no reason on the record before him to treat Mr. Barrett as anything other than the owner of the property. There was a small sound in the room, not a gasp, chairs, people shifting. And here is where I learned who Meredith Halston actually was, because a person who has simply made a mistake takes the off-ramp. It is right there. You say, "My apologies, our roster was out of date. Welcome to Hawthorne Ridge." 6 seconds and it is over and everybody goes home. She did not take it. She pivoted. "Even if Mr. Barrett has purchased the property," she said, "some people need time to understand the standards of a community like this one." "Which standards?" I asked. She did not answer that directly. She never answered anything directly, I would come to learn, because a direct answer can be quoted. She talked instead about how people who make a genuine long-term investment in Hawthorne Ridge tend to understand the architectural character and the courtesies and the image of the neighborhood, and how there was a difference between buying an address and belonging to a place. The board voted to remove the tenant registration violation. Meredith immediately moved to preserve the others, the truck, the containers, the landscaping item, and she got a lukewarm show of hands from 2 members who plainly wanted to be somewhere else. Kessler spoke up again. He said something on that video call that I wrote down word for word afterward because it turned out to matter more than anybody in that room realized at the time. He said that whenever an association enforces its covenants, it needs to be able to demonstrate that it enforces them uniformly, and that inconsistent enforcement against a single property creates exposure that the board, not any individual officer, ends up carrying. Meredith said, "Thank you, Daniel," in the tone people used to close a door, and moved to the next agenda item. I gathered my folder and stood to leave. She came around the end of the table as I reached the aisle, and she stopped close enough that only Elaine could possibly have heard her, and she said it low and pleasant. "Buying one house doesn't mean you belong here." I turned around. I did not raise my voice. There were people 10 feet away eating cookies off a paper plate. I didn't buy a house so you could decide where I belong. I drove home. I did not slam anything. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off for about 10 minutes, which is what I do instead of shouting, and then I made a sandwich and opened my laptop. There was an email from Nora Whitfield sent at 9:41 that evening. Nora's 45, has been my broker for 9 years, has a gift for finding properties where somebody needs out faster than the market normally allows, and has never once in 9 years used an exclamation point in a message to me. The subject line read, "Distressed property in Hawthorne Ridge, you may recognize the address." It was a colonial 6 bedrooms, 5,200 square feet, on the highest lot in Hawthorne Ridge, at the end of the only street in the whole development that had been named after a family instead of a tree. 17 Halston Court. I read the address 3 times, then I did something I am not proud of and not ashamed of either, which is that I laughed out loud in an empty kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, one short, surprised sound, and then I sat very still for a while. Here is what the file said, and I am going to be careful here, because this is the part where people usually get the story wrong. The house was in a lender-approved short sale posture. There had been a series of missed payments going back roughly 14 months. There was a second position line of credit, drawn nearly to the ceiling, which is very often the real story behind a house like that. There were 2 years of unpaid county property taxes, which is a matter of public record, and which anybody in the neighborhood could have looked up at any time and nobody ever had. Because why would you look up the tax status of the woman who tells everyone else what color to paint their trim? If a buyer did not come through cleanly, the lender's process would keep moving, and it would end the way those processes end. "The seller wants this quiet," Nora said. "That's the one condition that came with the file. No sign in the yard, no public listing photos with the address visible, showings by appointment through me only." Of course she did. That house was not shelter to Meredith Halston. It was an argument. It was the evidence she presented to the world every single day that she was the correct kind of person, and she had been presenting it for 17 years, and she had stood at a table 9 days earlier and told a room full of her neighbors that she knew every owner in Hawthorne Ridge, while she was, at that exact moment, 4 missed payments from not being one of them. I sat with that for a day, and I did not make an offer, not that week. Because the thing about buying a house out of anger is that anger does not sign the note. Anger does not pay the tax bill in January. If that roof was at the end of its life, if the foundation had a story, if the numbers did not work, then it did not matter one bit whose name was on the mailbox. I would be a man who had spent $700,000 to win an argument with a woman who would still, in her own head, believe she had been right about me. That is not winning. That is buying a very expensive way to keep thinking about somebody. So I told Nora to hold. I told her I wanted the full file, the disclosures, the inspection history, the tax records, the comparables, and I wanted 48 hours to look at it the way I would look at any other deal that crossed my desk. The next day Meredith sent me a new violation. This one was for a landscaping condition on the north side of my property, specifically a river rock drainage bed and 2 shrubs that the previous owners had installed. I know they installed it because it appeared in the listing photographs from before I ever toured the house. It was 10 months old. It had been there through the entire winter, through the sale, through the walkthrough, and nobody had ever said one word about it until the man standing in the driveway was me. With the accumulated daily fines from the truck notice and the container notice, the running total on my account had climbed past $3,200. At the bottom of the letter, in bold, was a sentence I have read on paper maybe 100 times in my career and had never once had aimed at me. Failure to comply may result in a lien against the property. A lien against my house, signed by a woman whose own home was in a lender-approved short sale with 2 years of delinquent taxes attached to it. I read that email for a long time. I did not feel hot. That is the part I remember. I felt very cold and very organized, the way I feel about 90 seconds before I walk into a negotiation I already know I am going to win. Then I picked up the phone and called Nora. "Send me everything on Halston Court," I said, "the whole file. And I want to be precise about what I was doing in that moment, because it was not revenge. It was a question. The question was whether that deal was good enough on its own terms that Meredith Halston stopped being a factor in it at all. Because if it was, then buying it was not personal. It was Tuesday. I underwrote 17 Halston Court exactly the way I underwrite everything, and I did it on a legal pad first because a spreadsheet will tell you what you want to hear if you let it. Market value. I pulled every closed sale within a mile in the previous 8 months and threw out the 2 that were not comparable, and the range for a house of that size and lot position in Hawthorne Ridge sat between $840,000 and $920,000. The lender-approved number Nora had was $685,000. Repairs. This is where a house like that eats people alive, because a home in financial distress is almost never a home that has been maintained. I sent my own inspector, not the seller's. The roof was original, 22 years old, with granular loss on the south face and 2 soft spots near a valley. Call it $41,000 to replace properly. Both heating and cooling systems were original to the build, $26,000 for the pair. A basement wall showed the ghost of a water event that had been painted over instead of fixed, which meant grading and a drainage correction on the east elevation. Another $9,000 if we were lucky and $18,000 if we were not. Kitchen was dated but sound. Bones were excellent, and the bones are the only thing you cannot buy later. It worked, not spectacularly. It worked the way a good deal works, which is boringly, with room to be wrong about 2 or 3 things and still come out fine. I called Nora and told her I wanted to move, and then I told her the one thing that mattered about how. "The offer comes from the company," I said, "not from me personally. My name doesn't appear in the negotiation. The offer went out under the name of my investment entity, an entity I had formed 6 years earlier and had bought 4 properties through already. North Star Residential Limited Liability Company. I am the managing member. I am the only member. That name means absolutely nothing to a person reading a purchase agreement unless that person walks it back to the state filing and reads the annual report. Meredith Halston never walked it back. She saw an out-of-town sounding investment company, and she did what people do when they are drowning, which is she looked at the number and the closing date and nothing else. While that was happening on one side of my life, the other side kept going. I sent a formal written request to the association, copied to Kessler and to the management company, asking for the enforced records for Briar Crest Drive going back 36 months, notices issued, addresses, violation categories, dates, resolutions, and fine assessments. I did not accuse anybody of anything in that letter. I did not use the word discrimination. I asked for records in real, citing the provision of the association's own governing documents that gives an owner the right to inspect them. Elaine Foster was the one who had to assemble the response because the treasurer keeps the ledger, and I have thought a lot since then about what those 2 evenings must have been like for her. Because what Elaine found was this: over 36 months on that street, there had been 41 violation notices issued in total. 9 of them were mine, 9 in 5 weeks, against a street where the average owner had received less than 1 in 3 years. There were property with documented commercial vehicles, visible storage, and unapproved exterior alterations that had never received a single letter, and there was a landscaping notice sent to 214 Briar Crest for a feature installed by a previous owner who had never been cited for it. Kessler asked Meredith in writing to explain the criteria she used to determine which observed conditions became notices. Her answer, and I have the email, was that Mr. Barrett had demonstrated an uncooperative attitude from his first interaction with the association. Kessler's reply was one line: "Attitude is not a provision of the covenants." That was when she called me 6:40 on a Wednesday evening from her personal cell phone, which I did not have in my contacts and which I therefore answered without knowing who it was. She did not identify herself. She said she thought I should understand something about how a community like Hawthorne Ridge functions, and that people who make trouble for the board have a difficult time enjoying living here, and that I ought to stop causing problems if I wanted a peaceful life on that street. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I asked her one question. Would you like to confirm that in an email so I have it accurately? The line went dead so fast I actually looked at the screen to see whether I had lost signal. I wrote down the date, the time, the number, the duration 4 minutes and 19 seconds, and the substance, and I put it in the folder with everything else. 3 days later, Nora called me at 7 in the morning, which she never does. North Star Residential's offer had been accepted, lender approval was in hand. Subject to final inspection and title, the house at 17 Halston Court would belong to my company in 21 days. Meredith Halston was at that moment still sending me letters about a rock bed. People with real power almost never escalate. They do not have to. Escalation is what you do when you can feel the floor moving, and Meredith could feel it, and so over the next 2 weeks she pushed harder than she had ever pushed at anything in her life. She proposed a special compliance review of my property, not a routine drive-by. A full documented inspection with a written report which in 17 years of that association's history had been done exactly twice, both times on houses that had been vacant for over a year. The items listed for review were as follows: my work truck, the landscaping bed, a doorbell camera, the paint color of my garage door trim, and a wooden bench beside my front steps. A bench, 4 feet of cedar with a cushion on it, in a neighborhood where a family 2 streets over had a full outdoor kitchen with a pergola. The doorbell camera was expressly permitted under an architectural amendment the association itself had adopted in 2021. The garage trim color was a shade on the approved palette, and the previous owners had submitted an architectural request for it and been approved in writing, and the approval letter was in the association's own files with Meredith's signature on the bottom of it. The landscaping bed had likewise been approved, in an application dated the previous spring, again signed by her. The bench required no approval at all under any provision of any document the association had ever adopted. I sent all of it to Daniel Kessler in one email, organized with the association's own approval letters attached, each one signed by the president, who is now citing those very features as violations. At the next board meeting, he told them plainly that a substantial portion of the outstanding violations against 214 Briar Crest Drive were unsupportable, that several concerned features the association had itself approved in writing, and that continuing to assess fines on them exposed the board to a claim it would not enjoy defending. And Elaine Foster finally said out loud what she had been carrying in a spreadsheet for 2 weeks. Why, she asked, are we spending more time on one house than on the other 406 combined? Meredith did not blink. Because some residents test boundaries. She caught me in the hallway afterward by the trophy case with the swim team photographs in it. She told me she had lived in Hawthorne Ridge for 17 years, that she had served on that board through 3 presidents before she became one, and that she had personally raised the money for the entrance landscaping I drove past every single day. Don't think that having enough money to buy one house means you can walk in here and change how everything works. And I finally understood her, standing next to a case full of children's swimming trophies. You still think this is about how much money I have, I said. I think I know your type. That was the moment, of everything she ever said to me, that was the one that told the truth, because it was the only sentence she ever spoke to me that was actually about her. Not about the covenants, not about the roster, not about a bench. Just a woman telling a man she had met 4 times that she had finished learning about him before he opened his mouth. I did not shout. I have never in my adult life gotten what I wanted by shouting. No, Meredith, I said, that's exactly the problem. You've never once tried to. She walked away. I want to tell you she looked shaken, and I do not think she did. I think she went home to a house she was packing up in secret and told herself a story about me that let her sleep. Because that is what was happening, and it is the detail that still gets me. That same week, Nora sent through the final walkthrough scheduling for 17 Halston Court. Meredith was moving, quietly, in stages at night, using a storage facility 11 miles away instead of a moving company, because a moving truck on Halston Court would have been seen by every single person whose opinion she had built her entire adult identity around. By day she sat at the head of a table and told her neighbors about community standards. By night she wrapped her own dishes in newspaper in a house she had already sold. And somewhere in there I stopped being angry at her, which I did not expect and did not particularly enjoy. because I finally saw what she was actually afraid of, and it was not losing the house. Losing a house is a financial event. People survive it constantly, and most of them are fine in 5 years. What terrified her was the day everybody found out she was no longer in a position to look down on anyone. 2 days before closing, Daniel Kessler sent a notice to the full board. Special session. Purpose: review of all enforcement actions taken by the president against 214 Briarcrest Drive and assessment of the association's exposure. I looked at the date on that notice for a long time. It was scheduled for 4 days after North Star Residential took title to 17 Halston Court. The closing took 35 minutes. There was no celebration. I did not take a photograph. I did not call anyone. I did not drive past the house. The purchase agreement gave the seller a short post-closing occupancy period to complete her move on standard terms with a defined end date. I did not shorten it. I did not add conditions. Nora asked me directly whether I wanted to, because she had started to sense that there was something under this file, and I told her no. And I gave her one instruction: every communication concerning that property from that day forward goes through her or through my attorney, not through me, not a text, not a conversation in a parking lot. Because there is a version of this where I win the transaction and lose myself, and it is very easy to find. It is the version where I show up at that house with my hands in my pockets and a smile, where I let her see me on the sidewalk, where I get the 12 seconds of pleasure and pay for them with the knowledge that I became, for those 12 seconds, exactly the kind of person she had already decided I was. I was not going to give her that, not because I am a saint, because I had already won, and men who have already won do not need a scene. Meredith, meanwhile, still believed North Star Residential was a faceless investment company from somewhere else, and she made her last stand. She brought a motion to the board to ratify the outstanding fines against my property, all of them, including the ones Kessler had already told them were unsupportable. She wanted a vote on the record. I think she believed that if she could get 4 hands in the air, the record would say the board had done it, not her. Kessler refused to advise in favor of it, and then he did something a lesser attorney would not have bothered to do. He pulled the county records himself. He pulled the deed for 214 Briarcrest Drive, recorded book and page, 3 days before the morning Meredith Halston stopped her car at the end of my driveway and asked me which house I was delivering to. Then he pulled the association's own email logs and the notice history, and he laid out a timeline that no reasonable person could look at twice. Deed recorded. Owner takes possession. President issues a tenant registration violation. Owner submits recorded deed, settlement statement, identification, and title company contact within 72 hours. President responds that documents are being verified. President issues 3 additional notices. President lists owner on a public community agenda under the heading tenant violation. President continues to refer to owner as a tenant in writing for a period of 26 days after receiving the recorded deed. He put that timeline in a memo to the board. He wrote that a pattern of enforcement concentrated on a single property, combined with a documented refusal to acknowledge a recorded ownership interest, and combined further with the fact that the president had signed the very architectural approvals she was now citing as violations, created a risk profile that he was obligated to disclose to them in writing. Meredith read that memo in a board session and lost her composure in front of 5 people. "You are letting a man who has been here 9 weeks run this board." Kessler did not raise his voice either. I have come to believe that everybody who was actually right in this story spoke quietly. "No," he said, "I'm trying to keep this board from being held responsible for decisions you made alone." Elaine Foster asked that a motion to review the presidency be placed on the agenda for the community meeting. And Meredith Halston, with 4 days of her old life left, decided she was going to humiliate me one last time in front of every neighbor she had. She sent me a formal letter. It demanded my appearance at the full community meeting to explain, and I am quoting the letter, my ownership status and irregular business activity within the community. I read it standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. After everything, after the deed, after the county stamp, after her own attorney's memo, she had finally chosen the right question. She just could not have picked a worse room, a worse week, or a worse man to ask it of. She wanted to stand up in front of 400 neighbors and ask me what I owned. The clubhouse had never been that full. They brought in chairs from the pool storage. People stood along the back wall with paper cups of coffee, and the room had that low hum a room gets when everybody has heard a fragment of something and come to hear the rest. Meredith sat at the head of the table in a cream jacket, and her posture was perfect, and I could see her hands. Daniel Kessler was on the video screen. Elaine Foster had a binder in front of her that was 2 inches thick, and I knew, because I had requested the underlying records, exactly what was in it. Meredith read the allegations against me out loud. 9 violations, failure to comply, operation of a business from a residence, unapproved exterior alterations, failure to register occupancy. She read them in a voice built for reading things out loud, and when she finished, she said that the community deserved transparency about who was living among them and what they were actually doing here. I answered each one in order, without adjectives. The occupancy item I answered with the recorded deed, and I gave the book and page number so anyone in the room could verify it from a phone. The business item I answered by noting that my office is in a leased suite on Providence Road, and that the covenants permit an owner to keep a home office with no client traffic, which is what I have, and so does every attorney, therapist, and financial advisor in that neighborhood. The trim color and the landscaping bed I answered with the association's own approval letters, the camera with the association's own architectural amendment, and Daniel Kessler confirmed each answer, one at a time, in a flat voice from a laptop screen, that Leon Barrett was the lawful owner of record, that the association had been in possession of the recorded deed for 26 days before the last notice referring to him as a tenant was issued, that several assessed fines were invalid on their face, that several cited features had been approved in writing by the association itself, and that the enforcement history for that street showed a concentration on one property that he could not reconcile with any written statute. 9 notices in 5 weeks against 41 across the whole street in 3 years. The room got very quiet, and it was not a friendly quiet, and it was not aimed at me. That is when Meredith did the thing that finished her, and I have thought about it many times since, and I believe she did it because she genuinely could not conceive of a version of reality in which she was not the wealthiest, most established person in that room. She looked out at her neighbors and she said that some people try to buy influence in a community with money and corporate structures instead of earning it. And then she said it. At least people like me actually live in the homes we own. We don't need limited liability companies to pretend to be somebody. The room did not react. I want you to understand that. Nobody gasped. There was just this flat silence, 400 people waiting. I did not answer her. I turned to the screen. Mr. Kessler, does North Star Residential Limited Liability Company appear anywhere in the most recent county records for this community? Kessler paused. He looked down at something off camera. He said yes, it did, in a transfer recorded that week. Meredith still had her chin up. She had not connected anything. She was waiting for whatever this was to be over so she could resume. Property address? Kessler read it out. 17 Halston Court. I have never in my life heard a room of 400 people make no sound at all for that long. Meredith's face did something I had not seen it do before. Every arrangement in it came apart at once. That's my house. Kessler let one full beat go by. I do not think he did it for effect. I think he was choosing his words with the care of a man who knew he was on the record. That is the house you sold on Tuesday. She turned and looked at me, and it was the first time in 11 weeks that Meredith Halston had genuinely looked at me. And I mean actually looked, without the story she had written on that driveway sitting in front of her face. I did not smile. I want that in the record too. I did not enjoy the moment the way I had imagined I might. North Star Residential is my company, I said. I'm the managing member. I signed the closing documents on Tuesday morning. Somewhere in the back of that room, a single person set a coffee cup down on a table, and it sounded like a gunshot. And then, before Meredith could assemble one word, Elaine Foster leaned into the microphone in front of her and said that she had a motion. A motion to review the removal of the president of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association from her office. Nobody cheered. Meredith spoke first, and she spoke to me, not to the board. You bought my house to get back at me. No, I said. I bought it because it was listed, the price was right, and the numbers worked. She shook her head. She was not going to accept that, and honestly, I understood why. It is much easier to be the target of a vendetta than to be a line item in somebody's investment file. A vendetta means you still matter. So I told her the truth in front of everyone. My broker sent me that file unprompted, with no idea who owned it. I did not act on it for 6 days. I sent my own inspector and priced the roof and the systems and the drainage before I decided anything. And if I had wanted to hurt her, the most effective thing available to me was to do nothing at all and let the lender finish the job. Your house was never the problem, I said. The problem is that you decided who I was before you knew my name. And then when the facts didn't match, you spent 11 weeks trying to make me smaller instead of changing your mind. Kessler advised the board to vacate every fine assessed against my property and to issue a written correction of the association's records. That passed unanimously in about 90 seconds. Elaine read her motion into the record, and she read the grounds, and they were not about a house on Halston Court. and that mattered more than anything else that happened that night. The grounds were selective enforcement of the covenants against a single property without any articulable written standard, failure to follow the association's own notice and hearing procedures, continued written characterization of a recorded owner as a tenant for 26 days after receipt of the deed, issuance of violation notices for architectural features the president had personally approved in writing, exposure of the association to legal liability contrary to the express written advice of its counsel, and use of an elected office to pursue a personal judgment about an individual owner. Not one word about the short sale, not one word about her finances. Elaine Foster never mentioned them, and to this day I do not believe she ever discussed them with anyone. The vote was called. It was not close. Meredith Halston lost the presidency she had held for 3 terms, and she lost it because of a paper trail she had created herself, one letter at a time, with her own signature at the bottom of each page. That is the part that has to be right, or none of the rest of it means anything. She did not fall because I bought her house. She fell because a treasurer kept a ledger, an attorney read the county records, and a man kept a folder. She gathered her things without hurrying. She has, I will give her this, an enormous amount of composure, and she used every ounce of it walking the length of that room. She stopped at my row. "Are you happy now?" And I gave her the only honest answer I had. "I never needed you to lose to know that I'd won." The move-out was completed on schedule, exactly according to the terms in the agreement. I was not there. I did not drive down Halston Court that week, and I did not ask Nora what condition the house was left in until the walkthrough report came through official channels, and when it came, it was fine. The house was clean. She had even left the manuals for the appliances in a drawer, rubber banded together, which is a small courtesy that people almost never bother with. North Star Residential started work 11 days later. New roof, 2 new systems. The drainage corrected properly instead of painted over. It will be a rental for a few years, and then it will be somebody's home, and whoever buys it will never once think about any of this. Elaine Foster became acting president, and the first thing she did was rewrite the enforcement procedure. Every notice has to include a photograph, a date, and the specific provision alleged to be violated. Every owner gets a written response window before any fine accrues. No single officer can initiate, adjudicate, and assess a violation alone, and ownership has to be verified against county records before any notice goes out at all, which is a sentence that exists in that community's rulebook today because of a man standing on a porch with a plastic tote in his arms. Travis Monroe asked me, maybe a month after all of it, over the fence with that miserable beagle straining at the leash, what the best part had been. He assumed it was owning her house. Everybody assumes it was owning her house. It was not. The thing I keep, the thing I will still have when the renovation is long paid off and I have forgotten what the roof cost, is a morning in March. Sun coming up over the oaks, my truck in my driveway, my key in my pocket, my deed recorded 3 days earlier in a county office 11 miles away with a stamp on it, permanent, indifferent, and completely uninterested in anybody's opinion of me. And a woman rolling down a window to explain the world to me. I did not need to buy Meredith's house to prove her wrong. The deed in my hand on the first morning already did that, completely, before she ever said a word. But Meredith was never actually interested in what was true. She was interested in what let her feel taller than me, and when the truth stopped cooperating, she went to war with the truth. So here is where it ends. Meredith Halston told me that people like me rent. 6 weeks later, I owned 2 houses in that neighborhood, and one of them was the house she used to prove she was better than me.